Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're doing a little reset here because the format for Shabbat Voices this month will be slightly different than it has been in the past. As opposed to a straight speech, I'm going to engage in dialogue with our guest, Sarah Hurwitz. So, Sarah, why don't you come on up? And if people can't see, I invite you to reposition yourself if you've got too much of my back, or people come towards the middle, you might be able to see us better. Sarah, welcome to Adat Shalom.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Sarah and I have known each other for a couple of years now, and I've became aware of her after her book came out, but we've met on the road at various events and things like that, and I was thrilled when she accepted my invitation. You already have her bio. I won't spend a lot of time on her bio. She served as a White House speechwriter from 2009 to 2017, first as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama, and then as the head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. Her book, which was discussed last week here at Adat Shalom, there was a special gathering for people who wanted to prepare for your presentation and this conversation. Her book, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism After Finally Choosing to Look There, came out a couple years ago and has been very highly received and highly read, and Sarah's been sought after in audiences all around North America to talk about her journey and some of what she's learned and how she's told the story about her discovery of Judaism. So here we go.
Thank you.
Sarah, why don't you first tell us how you came to become Michelle Obama's speechwriter?
Yeah, it's funny when you read the bio, it sounds very orderly and linear, and it really wasn't. I got my start as an intern in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office in the summer of '98, so I'm dating myself. And the writers I worked for helped me get my first two jobs out of college in speechwriting, both of which were total failures. The first one was I was the speechwriter I was the assistant to the speechwriter for the Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, and I commuted 3 hours a day round trip, sat in a windowless cubicle next to a bathroom, and quit after 9 months. I was then a speechwriter for a wonderful U.S. Senator named Tom Harkin. I'm sure many of you know of him. And I really don't know why they hired me. I didn't know a lot about speechwriting. And after about 9 months, his chief of staff sat me down and said, "I hear you've applied to law school. You should go." Just devastating when you're 23 years old, but I took the hint and went. And my third week of law school, as I was realizing this had probably been a small life mistake, I met a guy named Josh Gottheimer, who is now a congressman from New Jersey, but he was just a law school classmate of mine who had previously worked for President Clinton as a speechwriter. And the two of us started freelance speechwriting together to make money for law school. And we both got jobs on General Wesley Clark's primary campaign in '03. He lost. We got jobs on Kerry's campaign in '04. He lost. I was briefly a lawyer, and then I was Hillary Clinton's chief speechwriter, and we all know how that turned out. And I got hired on the Obama campaign for then Senator Obama, and he actually won, which was a wonderful new experience for me. And when I was on the campaign, I helped Mrs. Obama with her 2008 Democratic Convention speech. Got to know her. Oh, thank you. She's pretty extraordinary. Got to know her. Totally fell in love with her. But I was there to write for him. Went to the White House to write for him. Dutifully wrote for him for about a year and a half, and realized I actually just liked writing for her better. I felt more at home in her voice. I was more interested in the topic she was speaking about. And so I actually made a very unusual White House career move. I moved from writing for hello, sorry, to my dearest friends and best people in the world. Hi, Aaron. Hey, Ori. So I moved from writing for him to writing for Mrs. Obama, and that's where I stayed for the next 6.5 years. So unusual, kind of, roundabout career, but worked out.
It did work out, I would say. But given your career trajectory and your resume to that point, it would not have been expected that your next move would be to write a book about Judaism. So where did that boomerang happen, and what's the backstory to that?
Yeah, at the end of the administration, when I was realizing I wanted to write this book, I started seeking advice, and I talked to this political pundit who I really respected, and I told her about this book idea, and she said, no, that is not your first book. Oh, God, please. Your first book is about speechwriting or Michelle Obama or about politics, and then you can write that weird book that no one will ever read. Which is not bad advice, actually. She probably had a point. But, I grew up in a shul that was nothing like this one. It was very I know just being here today, it's like, oh, if I'd grown up like this, I would have had a very different, Jewish journey. But it was a kind of uninspiring 1980s reform shul. I hated the service. Hebrew school was boring. Became a bat mitzvah and was like, thanks, nothing to see here. I'm out. Pretty common Jewish journey in America for a number of historical reasons, which we'll get into. 25 years later, I broke with a guy I was dating, heard about an intro to Judaism class at the JCC, and just took it to fill time. I was not. People always want to say, "Oh, you were on a journey. You were seeking. You were in crisis." I wasn't. Really could have been a class on just about anything. So I took the class, and I was just blown away by the text we were studying. This is, if you grow up like I did, you don't see 99% of Jewish tradition, right? You see a Protestant version of Judaism, and I just thought, wait a second, Judaism has wisdom about everything. I mean, literally, these texts had wisdom about everything. I was like, well, where was this all my life? This is interesting. So I took another intro class, which my friends found hilarious. One of my friends said, he's like, come on. You walk in the door, you tell them you're Sarah Hurwitz, and is everyone like, all right, who brought the ringer? What's up with this? But I was a beginner. I think I related very much to the people in the class who were preparing to be Jews by choice. Their journey felt very similar to mine, actually. And the more I learned, the more I realized how hard it was to learn about Judaism as an adult. I really struggled because there were great kind of nuts and bolts intro books, which will give you the basics. And then there were these really academic and kind of esoteric books, which, if you have the patience to slog through them, you'll get a lot, but it's really a commitment. And there wasn't a lot that was in the middle that kind of, yes, covered the basics, but really dug into what is the deepest, most transformational wisdom that this tradition offers. And I thought, I'd love to share what I found. I'd love to write that book. And I quickly realized why that book didn't exist, right? This was just the speech writing challenge of all speech writing challenges. Jewish tradition very much resists, as you well know, articulation in simple, clear sentences. Any sentence I write, I would just realize there were 12 counter sentences I could write, and 12 counter sentences that, it's very hard to do this and to do it well because, you want to be specific, but you don't want to get too weedy. And, it was writing that book made White House speech writing look like a joke. I mean, it was so much harder. But I think something that's been really gratifying is that, I wrote the book for people like me, and I assumed that would be the audience. And it was. A lot of people said, oh my gosh, I grew up like you, and I read the book, and I related, and it changed my life, blah, blah. But, I was surprised to encounter Chabad rabbis and their wives who were like, oh, this book is actually for us. I was like, no, actually it was in no way for you. They said, look, we don't necessarily agree with how you practice. We don't agree with a lot of what you write, and we see your love for this tradition. We see that you did the homework. We see the 550 endnotes at the end of this book. And, you have some fresh takes that we find interesting. And I found that to be really lovely. I think in a community that is so often divided along denominational lines, to be able to just go into different types of community, meet with different types of Jews, and find this common ground of love for this tradition has been pretty moving.
Lovely. I'm just imagining, as you're speaking, Sarah, that had you lived in the early 20th century and had found Mordechai Kaplan and could have helped him write his books.
Oh my God.
Reconstructionism would be the largest movement in American Jewish life today.
I mean,
right?
It is, someone actually said that, I forget who it was, said that Mordechai Kaplan wrote with a pen dipped in concrete. And I just thought, such brilliant ideas, and ideas that have absolutely shaped Judaism in every, fundamentally, but man, real commitment to get through that guy.
Amen. I read my first Kaplan book at age 15. That was a slog.
Oh my God, that's impressive.
Don't be too impressed. Story for another time. So, Sarah, as you started to explore Judaism, you said you were surprised to find that Judaism had answers to some of the big questions about life. So give us two of those big questions that you were wrestling with and what you found.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the core ones really is how do you be a good person? What does it mean to be a truly good person? And I think the secular world offers some pretty mediocre answers to this question, right? It's sort of like the self-help aisle, which the word self should give you a hint as to what that aisle is focused on. The modern secular ethic is basically you do you as long as you don't hurt other people too much. That's fine. As an ethic for American law, that makes sense, right? We are very much focused in our society about rights and freedoms, right? So don't steal people's property, don't infringe on their civil rights, don't physically assault them, and you're pretty much good, which is a pretty low bar. You know, there's not a lot there about generosity, wisdom, self-sacrifice, kindness. You know, there's really a lot to be desired in that ethic. Fine for a secular country, not so great for a deep, worthy human life. And I think what I found in Judaism was, you know, what drives me crazy, I cannot stand the old anti-Semitic lie that Christianity is a religion of love while Judaism is a religion of law, as if those two things are in contrast. And there's a long Jew-hating history to that idea. But basically what it fails to understand is that Jewish law actually really reflects a very, very deep and rigorous commitment to love, an on-the-ground commitment to love. You know, it's nice to say, help the poor. That's a meaningless statement, right? I gave a dime to the poor, I'm good. Right? What does that mean? You know, in Jewish law, you actually have a very deep engagement with, well, what does that mean? How much? How do you do so in a way that respects their dignity, that empowers them? You know, there's just, as you know, reams and reams of thinking about this. And I just think about, you know, the wisdom that tells us that if you've loaned money to someone who you know is still really struggling financially, and you happen to see them coming down the street, and you know they still can't afford to pay you back, you should actually try to avoid them. And you could say, well, how legalistic, oh, those Jews and their laws. Or you could say, wow, what a powerful reflection of love, right? Jewish law is like when you go to the eye doctor's office and they keep kind of clicking the little thing to make your vision clearer and clearer. You know, Jewish law is fine-tuning your ethical vision to see whatever and whoever is in front of you more clearly. So what it is saying is, you see that person and really think about, what are they going through right now? Put yourself in their shoes. You know, what is the appropriate response that will protect that particular person's dignity? And I think that kind of moral vision is very much a guidepost for how to live an ethical life. And yeah, it involves studying a lot of Jewish law. It's weedy. I'm sorry. Welcome to Judaism. You know, I think there is this weird American idea that, like, no, it's about what you feel. Just sit and let the Judaism wash over you. That is nonsense. It's utter nonsense. Right? That is not Jewish ethics. And so I think for me that, you know, the answer to that life question was quite important. I think maybe a second big life question was just, you know, where do I belong? You know, kind of where and to whom do I belong? And, you know, Jewish tradition offers a really countercultural tradition. You know, the answer in modern secular Western countries is, I belong to whoever I say I belong to. Look at me, I'm a modern individual. I have no obligations. I'm free, I choose, which making us miserable, but, you know, please go ahead. And I think all of us, including me, believe that to some extent. We live our lives that way to some extent, but what Jewish tradition tells me, actually, no, you're obligated to 4,000 years of your ancestors. You're obligated to this people into whom you were born or to whom you chose to join. You know, that is to whom you are obligated. And obligated to others as well. The tradition certainly has many rings of obligation, including the whole world. But that to me has been a very powerful, help me rethink how I live my life. So those, I think, are two big life questions to which Judaism, I'm so reluctant to say provides an answer, provides endless answers that are helpful.
So that second observation you've just made is a nice segue to my next question. You in your study of Judaism, you were quite enchanted by some of the work of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who for a long time was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, passed away tragically at a fairly young age last year, and who we've invoked many times here, and speak about people who are deeply knowledgeable but also an outstanding expositor of Judaism in a clear language. So he caught your interest and fancy. And he had a phrase that you really loved about that Judaism is a family story. So what captivated you about that phrase, and how do you drash it? What do you think Sacks meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, he was, you know, I think of him, even though I never met him, I think of him as one of my greatest teachers. You know, I spoke on the phone with him once. He actually called me when my book came out, which was, I mean, I was like overcome with, I just kept telling him how great he was, which I think was awkward for both of us. But, you know, I think wherever Jews have gone in the world, especially in really more in the actually, I should say, wherever Jews have gone in the world in the modern era, we've really tried to explain ourselves in terms that the majority around us would understand. So, you know, in America, we've at times been like, we're a religion, we're just like you. We go to a different church. Also in Europe in the 18 and 1900s. Or we've said, oh, we're an ethnicity. We're an ethnicity. That's not true. Jews are every ethnicity. Or, we're a race. No, we're not. Jews are every race. We're also not a religion, right? We are not somehow equivalent to Protestantism. None of those categories work because Jews predate all of those categories. So what are we? I mean, I guess we're whatever the Ammonites and the Hittites and the Amalekites are, right? Some kind of ethno-religious tribe. But none of them exist anymore. Only we do. And so I think, the word family, peoplehood, that to me is what we are. That explains what we are. And it's messy, nothing's ever precise, but families you are both born into or you can join, right? That I think is actually, it's a pretty good analogy. And I love Sacks's analogy in his book, Letter in the Scroll, which is I think one of the great Jewish texts of all time. If anyone hasn't read it, please do. He says, look, if you imagine yourself in a library, which is basically like modern Western, you're a modern Western empowered person, choose any book you want. You can pick them off the shelf. If you like it, you can read more of that author. If not, just put it back. And he says, but imagine you pick a book off the shelf, and it's an old leather-bound book, and you open it up, and you realize, and it starts off, and you realize, oh my gosh, this is the wisdom, this is my ancestors. This is actually my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great grandparents telling me their wisdom about how to live a good life. And then it's the next generation, and the next generation, page after page. And then finally you get to a page, and it's blank, but it has your name on it. Now, are you just going to close the book and be like, well, that was interesting, put it back on the shelf and walk away? Probably not. Is that book objectively better than the other books? Probably not. But that book is the story of your family. And I think the ethic of family is really important in explaining Judaism. To modern Western people, I think it's very confusing how we are. But that, to me, is it's a helpful way of understanding my role as a Jew and what Judaism is.
Right, so you won't be surprised to hear that we love that formulation. Kaplan actually took that and used the word peoplehood for it. So what Sachs calls a family story, Kaplan called early on peoplehood. And that's a term that's been borrowed by many who are not calling themselves Reconstructionists, but the notion of peoplehood says we are more than just a religion. We're more than just a set of rituals and holidays and life cycle functions. But the other side of that, which I wanted you to respond to, is if we are a family story, if we are people, how do we avoid the impression that is widely held that we as Jews are a closed club, whether that's being closed to non-Jews who might well be interested in becoming Jewish, but they figure it's a closed club, I don't have the key, and I don't know the secret handshake, I can't get in. Or, to take an even more toxic version of that, trying to stay with A before you get to B, in our national story, Zionism is the family story of us becoming a political entity. And that's now turned against us as saying, well, Zionism is a form of racism, isn't it? Because it's so exclusive. So how do you embrace the good parts of family story and peoplehood and not avoid the accusations that we're closed, exclusive, and elitist?
So, those stories come from outside of us, right? Those stories come from those who are not our biggest fans. They're not new stories, as you know, right? Those stories have thousands of years of history behind them. And I think if it's one lesson I've learned, especially since October 7th, it's that trying to change that story is sort of like trying to bail out a tsunami with a bucket. Please do so if you feel like it's helpful to you in some way. I don't want to yuck your yum. You do you. But I've just increasingly really focused on how can I build this ark that's going to help us not drown in this. So I think, certainly I think there are things we can do to honor our own. I don't think the question is how do we seem less X to our haters. I think that question has never led the Jewish people anywhere all that great. I think the question is how do we honor the best of Jewish tradition? And the best of Jewish tradition, in my opinion, is not chauvinist, right? I mean, it is just, I think that the chauvinism in Jewish tradition often comes from having been persecuted, right? And having been victims and having kind of come up with a narrative of like, well, we're better than the Goyim, right? Not great, but also understandable that people who are really victimized and persecuted would come up with a narrative that's a little bit chauvinistic. So I don't, I think the question is not like, how do we look good to others, but like, okay, how do we really dig into the best of Jewish tradition and honor that? And I think that does mean being radically welcoming. I think, when I look at people who are still fighting intermarriage, I'm like, really? because that ship sailed roughly 4 decades ago, and I think shaming and shunning people, it turns out, generally doesn't lead them to raise Jewish kids. Generally doesn't. It's shocking, I know. Whereas radically welcoming them and saying, hey, we want you to be part of our community. Please come in. What can we teach you? How can we make you part of this? Turns out that's actually pretty successful. So I think really digging into our tradition, honoring, and look, are there voices that say the bad things in our tradition? Of course. Right? Of course there are. But the work of Jewish tradition has always been that work of interpreting, of trying to honor what we think is the highest voice. And I think the highest voice is one of inclusion with some boundaries, right? There is a thing where you say, like, actually, here is what a mainstream view of Jewish tradition thinks. That view is kind of an outlier. We consider it, whatever. But I think it's about digging into our tradition and finding those voices that are inclusive and not chauvinist.
So this is a related question. You like the term Jews as a choosing people. And I guess I would challenge you by saying that, are you avoiding the tough phrasing of that, which Mordechai Kaplan identified early on, and that is that our tradition calls us the chosen people, not the choosing people. And Kaplan argues that because of the way chosen people and chosenness is misunderstood, not just by the haters, to use your term, but even by Jews themselves who believe that chosen people means that we are somehow better, smarter, more special than anyone else. Kaplan felt we had to excise that from our tradition. And if you picked up in our brachot, the phrase Asher Bach Rabbanu was gone. We don't say that. And there are other phrases in the prayer book that are changed because Kaplan felt that the term itself was harmful to the Jewish mind and heart and has a negative play in the outside world as well. But you clearly reject that approach of Kaplan. So say more about what did Kaplan not understand that you understand?
I mean, all right, when you put it that way, I'm not gonna, I mean, I understand, especially as a Jew in, the early mid 1900s, like understandable kind of defensive move to say, okay, this looks bad. This is misunderstood by both the haters and Jews. So let's get rid of it. Totally, I actually think that's a reasonable move. So I don't criticize him for that move, but I disagree with it today because I think if you actually, as you well know and many of you know, if you actually look at the Torah and the language around chosenness, like it is not a mark of superiority. It's quite clear. Like that is really not. There are few things in Jewish tradition that are clear, but the idea that superiority means that Jews are objectively better than other people, I don't think that's supported by the text. I'm sure you can find, yes, I know people have taken it in that direction, but I mean, the Israelites in the Torah, they're not great. They're not great. They do not come off looking great. They are the whiniest, weakest, most awful characters, and actually it is the non-Israelites who I think are some of the most heroic, noble, brave characters in the Torah. And God is consistently displeased with these Israelites, right? So chosenness does not mean chosenness because you are special. In fact, the only justification for chosenness is in the Torah is like God loves you because he loves you. And it's not really all that self-esteem building, although in some ways it is. So I think the question is, to me, chosenness means chosen for a particular relationship with God. I think Christians are also chosen for a relationship with God. Same with Muslims, same with, I think this is something that in some way every spiritual, whatever group says about itself. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I really don't. I think we have to understand it correctly. But I think, what's heartbreaking, I'm currently reading a lot about 1800s Europe, is, you see these European Jews who for centuries had viewed themselves as beloved to God, chosen by God, having a special mission in the world, and that really sustained them. It gave them a sense of nobility and self-esteem, even under incredible persecution, struggling with abject poverty. And then, modernity, emancipation, and they lose that all. Right? It's like, chosenness is nonsense. It's not logical. It's not enlightenment. Whatever. And I think that was a loss for us. Right? I think that's just a loss. I think chosenness is a spiritual idea. It is not a racial idea. It is not a claim of ontological greatness. It really isn't. So I think if you understand it properly, I think it can be very powerful. And I don't think we should ditch it. I understand why he did, but today I don't think we should.
So my proof text for this, which I couldn't lend to Mordechai Kaplan given what he wrote, but my proof text for this is Tommy Smothers, who just died a week ago, right? Who, if you remember the show, always said to his brother Dick, Mom always liked you best. There's something about kind of the human mind that assumes that, we're co-equal, but Mom liked you best, right? But I'm going to leave that behind and just say to you, given how I've challenged you with Kaplan, that your bottom line actually is quite similar to Kaplan. Because Kaplan says in one of his later books, The Religion of Ethical Nationhood, that he may love Judaism more, but that was not by him an objective statement that it was better than everyone else's.
Exactly.
It was simply the path that he knew the best and came to love because it was his. And he argued, as later Jonathan Sacks argues, 50 years after Kaplan wrote it, by the way, in The Dignity of Difference, Kaplan argued that every religion has a valid path to truth with a capital T. So Kaplan wrote that in the mid-20th century. And when Jonathan Sacks wrote that as the chief rabbi of the UK, he actually got into a lot of trouble with some of his Orthodox colleagues who didn't like the fact that Sacks is now quoting Kaplan in a sense, without mentioning Kaplan, saying that every religion has a valid path to truth. I think we need a lot more of that openness to other faith paths as well.
I agree, and it's unfortunate because Sacks was actually quite faithful to Jewish tradition, right? I mean, it's not perfect, not a totally inclusive tradition, but Jewish tradition is very clear that monotheists are okay, right? You follow the 7 Noahide commandments, you're good with us. That is the traditional position. Now, does that exclude a lot of people? Yes. It's not my position, but I don't think Sacks was on totally non-existent halakhic grounds. Like that actually is very much our tradition, unlike other traditions that make quite clear there is one way to God. If you don't choose that way, we have a variety of responses, but there really is one true way. That's a different way, right? Judaism does not say that, and it's something I actually love about our tradition.
So I want to talk about God for a minute, maybe 2. In your chapter on theology, you clearly have a quick, Jewish Theology 101. I mean, Buber, Heschel, you mentioned Harold Kushner. You're very much drawn to what has been called recently, it's not a language that Kaplan had, process theology. That God is not an entity, a being with a consciousness, but it's a process at work in the universe through which human beings fulfill themselves. And that's very Kaplanian, although he used different language. But it's also clear that although you studied Kaplan, his language and his theology do not speak to your heart at all. So say a bit more about where you've come out theologically and why the Kaplan language kind of left you cold.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd even just say Jewish theology is sort of a contradiction because we generally don't do systemic theology. I mean, there were medieval folks who tried. They are one of, just a few of many, many thinkers throughout the ages who've really expressed different ideas of the divine based on their own intuitions and experience and understanding of Jewish tradition. And I think that tremendous humility, that theological humility, is something that I absolutely love. I think the Jewish approach to the divine is that we are talking about something infinite and ineffable, and we are not going to try to shrink it down to some kind of dogma or definition or creed, right? To do so isn't a way to commit a type of idolatry. It's to say we can take this ineffable, infinite thing and shrink it down to something that our little human minds can grasp. It's kind of creating a thought idol in my mind. And so, I love all these different ideas, right? Kaplan's idea actually makes sense to me intellectually. I'm moved by that. I'm moved by Maimonides' thinking intellectually. There's a lot of people who intellectually process theology. All of that stuff, I don't have there's not one theologian who I say, that is my guy, that is my gal, that is my person, I believe everything they think. I don't really think that's how a Jewish approach to the divine works. I think that a Jewish approach to the divine, you just take in a lot of different ideas, experiences, images, and they kind of just are all pinpoints of data that allude and that gesture to something that is beyond our comprehension. And the ones that are more heady, those are very helpful to me, but there is something kind of a little missing for me, right? It doesn't leave me cold, it just feels a bit incomplete. And I do think, do I have a really strong idea of a personal God who I talk to, who's a you? I wouldn't say it's strong, but it is there, right? And I think, look, I'm not, I'm a human being. I can't relate to the Ein Sof, the everything. I can't relate to a process. I can only relate to another being. So if I want to have a sense of relationship or connection, there needs to be some you there. And so I think at the end of the day, for me, it's just not quite enough, right? The Maimonides, the Kaplan, the, Bradley Shavit Artson, that's just not quite enough for me, right? There's something missing. But I also know for a lot of people that you leaves them cold, right? It just doesn't resonate with them, and that's okay.
The you with a capital Y.
Sorry?
The you with a capital Y.
Yes, the you with a capital Y. It leaves them, it just leaves them a little cold. They're like, that's sort of illogical, or it just doesn't feel good. But I think there are lots of ways to the divine. It can be through relationship and this kind of emotional thing, or it can be through awe and wonder, or it can be through gratitude. I mean, there's just so many ways in. And so for me, it leaves me a little cold, but I think for a lot of people, those theologies are really helpful.
So I know you know that many American Jews, probably the majority, build their identity around Jewish social and political activism. And that's their Judaism. They may never set foot in a synagogue. They may not believe in God. They may brag about the fact that they're atheists or agnostics, but they're very active on an array of social and political issues, and that to them is their path. And they'll say, that's what makes me Jewish. You've worked at the highest echelons of public service in this country. What do you have to say about Jews who build their identity around social political activism and leave the religious theological practice on the side?
I mean, first of all, I think it's wonderful that they're doing this social and political activism, right? Obviously, I'm a big fan. I just have to say, I've never met a Jew who said, social justice is my Judaism, who knew a single thing about Jewish tradition or what Judaism actually says about social justice. That sounds harsh, but I'm just being very honest in my experience. Are there Jews who actually are really familiar, deeply familiar with the Jewish social justice tradition and aware of what the texts say and who are engaged in social justice? Yes. I think that's fabulous, right? I am such a fan of that. Folks who say, social justice is my Judaism, and here are the 100 texts that I cite that shape how I engage in social justice in the world. That to me is very much a Jewish approach to social justice. But when social justice is essentially a substitute for your Jewishness, it doesn't do much for me. It's also a little bit dismissive of the many Christians and Muslims and Hindus and totally secular people who are deeply engaged in social justice, right? Social justice isn't just your Judaism. It isn't just Judaism, it's Christianity, and it's like a lot of people like social justice. There is, however, a specific Jewish approach, many specific Jewish approaches to social justice, and if you are totally unaware of them, I'm not really sure that social justice is your Judaism. Social justice is you being a great person in the world. I think it's wonderful, but I think for you to claim it's your Judaism is a little disingenuous. It's not contradictory to Judaism. I don't think that can really be a substitute. And by the way, I don't think people have to come to shul. I don't think they have to practice in a certain way. That has never been my argument. My argument has been you have to read some books. Sorry, I know that people find that very oppressive. Asking Jews to read books, God forbid. Who would do such a thing? Our people read a lot of books. I'm pretty confident they can read books about Judaism too. I have faith. I do.
Okay, so because
hot take, I know.
Because we're friends, I'm going to say this. The first part of your answer, yes, was very harsh, and I would argue with it. I'm not going to do that here. But because one of the tools of your trade is the red pen, I would red pen your answer, in a sense, and just put back into your court the notion that what you observed may have been true 50 years ago, but over the past 20 years, we should celebrate the fact that so much of Jewish social and political activism has been deeply informed by a study of text, tradition, and values.
Right, and that is the kind that I love, right? That is, social justice is your Judaism in that case, in a beautiful way.
Yeah, so to the extent that's been a big part of my own work, okay, I think that's got to be just named, and it's a little bit dated to say that the people you know who are Jewish activists have never picked up a Jewish book. That's just not true anymore.
I've definitely met some, but it's fair enough. I think in the very engaged, in the truas of the world, and of course, right, that's literally part of, Repair the World. They study Jewish texts as part of their service. So I think people who are really engaged in these Jewish social justice organizations, of course, but there are plenty of Jews who are engaged in not Jewishly related social justice organizations who I don't think are getting that Jewish connection.
And just quick commercial. Tomorrow's Sunday Service Day will start out tomorrow with a text study that I will lead about what's Jewish about what we're about to do the rest of the day. Okay, and that's I think, more de rigueur these days.
Oh,
than
and
aesthetics.
I mean, I think every shul that is doing the service work does that work too, right? Does that Jewish tradition and text work along with it? And I think that is phenomenal. That's the model.
Okay, this will be my last question, then I'm going to open it up and let you ask a few questions before we lose our run of time. So I loved your chapter about Shabbat, especially your honesty about the fact that you love so much about Shabbat and you're still having a hard time building it into your life as a life pattern. I thought that was very fair and very honest. And I think there are a lot of people here that would relate to that. Great idea. I'm still working on it, kind of thing. So mention two of the most compelling ideas about Shabbat that speak to you, and share with us a little bit your struggle about trying to incorporate that into your personal life.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first idea that's really meaningful to me is just the idea that Shabbat really is a protest against so many of the excesses of our modern life, right? The endless commercialism, the endless not enough-ism, right? Oh, you are not enough. You're not fill in the blank, wealthy, fit, beautiful, blah, 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 buy this product and then you'll be enough, except that you won't, right? That kind of constant striving and ambition that I think makes us so unfulfilled. You know, the whole idea of Shabbat is, no, you're enough. Please stop. Stop creating, stop striving, stop spending, actually really kind of push back against the everyday world, against this workaday 24/7 world. I think that is extraordinary. I think the second thing that I really value is that Shabbat is it's a chance to connect deeply to others. You know, I've noticed that in communities where I've done Shabbat, where people are observing very rigorously the traditional restrictions around it, you know, no one's on a phone. No one's going anywhere because there's nowhere to go. There's no soccer game. There's literally nowhere to go and nothing to do. And so people are just radically present with each other. There's no distractions. And it's you know, the kind of conversations you have, the kind of attentiveness people have to each other, it's quite profound. You know, I think my struggles with it, observing it personally, are a fewfold. You know, first of all, I'm single and I don't have kids. And I think that, you know, as a single person, you know, I see a lot of my friends who have families. It's sort of like a lot of what happens on Shabbat is kind of around families and which, you know, that makes sense, right? The unit of engagement in Judaism is not just the individual. It is the family. It is the community. So I think it's like, you know, being a single person going to shul and like hanging out and trying to find places to hang out, it's like a little awkward. I think also, you know, I think we make the mistake, and by we, I mean I, of saying like, I don't observe Shabbat in the most traditional way, hence it is not a real observance, and that's just not true. But I think there are so many ways to observe this. Maybe it's 2 hours with your family, dinner Friday night, everyone shuts down. Beautiful. Right? Maybe, you know, I don't think it's all or nothing, and that's how I often think about it. And so I really try to push myself to say, like, okay, you don't have a traditional observance, but did you do a really great Shabbat dinner with your friends where you stayed up till 1 a.m. and no one checked a phone? Yeah, you did. You know, there are different ways to do it, but I think, you know, frankly, I also struggle because I have a book deadline. And there is that kind of like, I'm writing this book about Judaism, I can't lose a day, there is that kind of thing, and that's not great. Hate to say it, it's not something that I love about myself, and there have been times in my life where I've been much better about pushing back and saying, no, this is not a day for work, I'm going to do it. And I think I sort of toggle back and forth, but it's something I really feel like I want to work on. But everyone can do this differently. You know, I don't like to prescribe practice for people because I'm still trying to figure it out for myself.
So it's really lovely. I'll share just one anecdote that I share with other people as well. I think that too often non-Orthodox Jews, liberal, progressive Jews, whatever adjective you want to use, surrender the language playing field to the Orthodox, and it's unfortunate. So you may know that to be a witness to a ketubah, you need two witnesses. If the rabbi is an Orthodox rabbi, and I've had this experience where I was a witness to a wedding being done by an Orthodox rabbi, and he says to me, I was a little bit surprised, but I was happy how I held my ground. As he hands me the pen, he says to me, are you Shomer Shabbat? Which is Hebrew for, like, do you observe the Sabbath? And I just said yes. And I knew that the way I observe Shabbat is not the way he observes Shabbat. But for my worldview, and I spend my life and career thinking about this, I'm totally Shomer Shabbat, just not the way he would define it. And I would say the same thing to you, Sarah, and that is that you are Shomer Shabbat in your own way. It may not qualify going to some of the more strict rulings of Jewish law and ritual, but you're finding your own path, and that's totally valid.
And I appreciate that, and I think that is so true. I think if I'm being honest, I have seen that when I do it more rigorously, it is more powerful, right? And that's just for me. For some people, they're like, nope, not powerful at all. But for me, I have seen the power of that. So it does feel like something I'm missing right now.
We have a few minutes. Will a few people take a mic here? And here's the part. Shelley, thank you. Where's the mic on the stand?
I'm holding.
I know Sarah's got one, but we had two other mics. Yes, no? Get the management stand. Yeah. Yeah. Good, yeah.
Thank you so much. Really interesting. I was wondering what you think about young people. So I have 2 college-age sons, and as you can see in our community on a Shabbat morning, there are not very many 20-somethings. And I just got your book, so I haven't read it all the way through, but I'm really enjoying it so far. But what I'd really like to do is get my children to read it, and they won't. They're not, I mean, especially if I give it to them, like, that's not gonna work. So I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about how to bring the lessons of your book to the people who, in my view, need it most, who are people who are at a stage in life where they're trying to figure out how to be a good person, what kind of life they want to lead. And your lessons are so timely for them and so profound, but how to get it to them?
Thank you. That's a really important question. There is an audiobook of my book if they listen, not reading, but that's not my answer. First of all, I'll just say this shul is actually this audience is much younger than many shuls I've been to on a Saturday morning, so I would say this is actually, you're all doing pretty well here, so don't feel too bad. I just also, I just want to name how hard it is as a parent to raise Jewish kids in a country that has such a strong assimilationist pull, right? Like, it is so hard. Every force is conspiring against you, right? Soccer practice is Saturday morning, and there's so much homework, and there's this, and like, this is we are on a Christian calendar in America, right? We live, Christianity is the air we breathe in this country. So I just, I meet all these beautiful, wonderful Jewish parents and grandparents who are like beating themselves up and like, I failed. No, you didn't, right? You were swimming up a 5-star rapid here. So I think just giving yourself that compassion and grace and knowing how hard this is and all the forces that are conspiring against it, especially in college campuses these days, right? Reading a survey, I'm sure all of you saw this recent Harvard-Harris poll that indicates that 67% of people between the ages of 18 and 24 believe that Jews are oppressors and should be treated as oppressors. Okay, that is one heck of a rapid to swim up. So I just want to name that. I think that on college campuses, Hillels are great. I've been traveling across the country visiting them, so I think like your kids might not be into Hillel, totally fine, I get it, but that can be, or Chabad, right? That's also a popular option. But I also think, I do often see parents who kind of are like, I'm going to outsource this to Hebrew school, and then I'm going to yell at them for not making my kid Jewish in 2 hours a week, right? And that is that's not you, and that's probably not the people in this room, but I have seen that in other communities. The fact that you were all here on a Saturday morning indicates to me that you all are doing the Judaism every day a week, right? You're probably, if you have kids, conveying to them your love for this tradition, engaging in something Jewish in your home, whatever that is. And I think kids see that, and maybe they go to college and they don't seem like they retained it, but they did. I think the best way to make kids Jewish is for you as an adult to find your Jewishness and to celebrate it and to be proud of it and to engage in it in a way that they see you doing it. And I think that really sticks. I do. And I think the fact that you all are here probably indicates that you're all doing it. But I just want to name, it's really hard, and I don't have a great solution. Like, I wish I had something I could tell you. I do think groups like BBYO, Nifty, these Jewish youth groups are wonderful. I see the way kids form these relationships and they get to be leaders and they create their own activities. I think stuff like that can really matter, and I think Jewish summer camp, that is data really backs that up. So many options, but a big challenge.
Yeah. Whoa. Let's go to this side. That's too loud. Please, Seth.
Thank you very much for your talk. I just wanted to add that many have said that Judaism is a religion of zachor, of remember or remembrance. And to your point about reading books, how do you know what to remember if you don't read any of the texts? So I support 100% what you said.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Randy. Rena, lower this volume a little bit. This is too loud up here.
I wanted to thank you also, and I also wanted to invite you to come next Saturday and the next Saturday and the next Saturday, because there are a lot of us here. I am not single, but there are a lot of women here and men, and we just get together and have those deep conversations that you're talking about. And we don't care if you think it's chosen or not chosen. We're all trying to figure it out too. So I just want to welcome you to come back, please.
Thank you.
Be here. Be sitting with us.
Thank you. I've actually been hearing about this shul for years from my friend Aaron Strauss, who he and his wife Jackie are members, and their 2 little girls are here. So I'm a fan from afar.
Sarah, I think you just were invited to sit with the women's club back there, that back row, so that's pretty special.
Thank you.
John, please. There's the mic right behind you.
Hi. Early in your talk, you were talking about what it is to be Jewish, and I think you already have a better answer, and you just haven't noticed it. You keep using the word tradition, and not everybody picks up the whole tradition, but it's tradition that is the only important part of that discussion. So I converted, accidentally. I really did. I mean, I joined the shul, I got involved, I went through the whole bathing in the pool and the whole thing. But everyone came up to me and said, I thought you already were Jewish. Because I was. I'd been living as a Jew for 10 years. And that was my conversion. And, this place is special because I did that. I can lane. I can do Hagbah. I play shofar. I'm a Jew. I can talk forever, and I will argue about anything for any length of time.
Thank you, John.
There are many who would say you have a Jewish soul,
Right.
And I think that word tradition, it's actually, I don't love the word Judaism because that seems like it's sort of a religion. I will often say Jewish tradition because I think you're right. It is engaging with that tradition in whatever way. I don't have a prescription, but you got to dive in. So I agree.
Great. Introduce yourself, please.
Bradley.
Hi, Bradley.
So, I'm 17. Or nearly 17. So, I was wondering, from your perspective, I had gotten into a debate with a classmate at school on what was going on in Israel and Gaza, and some of the people call it, a genocide or a massacre, something like that. And how do you kind of counter that? What would you respond with, and how do you kind of see what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel for young people today, and I really admire you for engaging, right? Like, that's a kind of a brave thing to do and can be a very hard thing to do. I mean, I see this in a much broader historical perspective. I mean, the answer is it's not genocide. Any intelligent person will tell you that, but that is the actual answer according to international law, whatever. I won't get into that because I'm not an expert. What I can say is, looking at the sweep of Jewish history, this story of Jewish power, depravity, and conspiracy has run through the language and rhetoric of our haters for thousands of years, right? This idea of Jews as just uniquely depraved, bloodthirsty, preternaturally powerful, all working together to harm non-Jews. That is just a very sticky and persistent narrative. And I think what you see in Israel today, it's just another iteration of that narrative. The really, I mean, there are legitimate critiques of Israel that I don't think are that narrative. I have them too. But the kind of extreme language of like Jews are the new Nazis, Jews are, Israelis are committing genocide, this kind of language that is so extreme, I think it's a reflection of just a very old anti-Semitic story. So I think, when you're arguing with someone, you're arguing with 3,000 years of history, right? So it's, I think that's, in a way, when you have the tsunami, the bucket, and you're trying to bail out the tsunami, you're arguing with Western thought. Western thought has very much been shaped by Jew hatred. And that is not my idea. That is the idea of David Nierenberg, who's a professor at University of Chicago, who wrote a 700-page book proving this point. It's quite compelling. It's definitely a dense read. Not a beach read, but if you can slog through it, it's worth it. So I think my advice to you is for the people who are real ideologues, who just want to tell you that Jews are Nazis and it's genocide and all those white people in Israel, right? They are, they're kind of, I'm not sure arguing with those folks is that helpful. What I do think is helpful is arguing with folks who are just like, there are a lot of young people who are just ignorant. They don't know anything, but they think that silence is violence. So they see something on social media and they want to be an ally, so they repost it. But if you actually say to them, actually, are you aware that Hamas is a terrorist organization that's recognized as such by the State Department? They might be like, whoa, wait a second, I didn't know that. Right, so I think for people who are not, kind of foaming ideologues, I think it's worth really talking to those people and saying, like, did you know X? Did you know that actually Israelis aren't all white? Actually, Jews aren't all white. That word doesn't even make sense with us. Let me tell you more about that. There is where I think you can make a difference. But I don't think you're going to win a debate with these ideologues, because the debate isn't about whether or not Israel's committing genocide. It's really a bigger debate about who and what Jews are, and that's a hard debate to win.
Anthony.
First of all, I loved your talk and look forward to reading your book. I can very much relate to the idea of thousands of years of our family. And I guess my question is, when relatives or the next generation or friends say, hey, I'm Jewish, I love Seinfeld, I eat matzo brie occasionally, what do you say to those folks? Thank you.
No, it's a great question. As someone for whom that was my Jewish identity for 36 years, I relate to this. And, that identity, it's really heartbreaking, because I think, I will speak for myself, I thought that was a really freely chosen, empowering identity. I thought I was awesome. I was so clever. Haha, my mother is anxious. Haha. But, the truth is, it's actually a really self-abasing identity. If one of my Black friends or colleagues said to me, I'm Black, but I'm not black. I'm culturally Black. Social justice is my Blackness. Oh, let me tell you some stereotype. Haha. I think I'd be horrified, right? It's like, wait, you're trashing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of achievement and innovation and accomplishment and like history and culture and arts and music and math and science. Like, you're just trashing your ancestors. Like, I think that would be shocking to me. And yet that is what I did for 36 years. And it's really a pretty direct result of a lot of internalized anti-Semitism, right? It is that desperate kind of desire to be like, oh, we're just like you. I'm just like you. I just go to a different church. Don't worry. And we're going to talk more about the history this afternoon, but I think I'm actually writing a book about this very topic. Literally, my next book is this very topic.
And I was going to say that this issue is the afternoon 1 o'clock talk, so we'll do more about that later. So, Anthony, you've got to be here. Noah, please.
Thank you so much. I love that image of family. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, for me, as an Israeli and as a Jew, who's very connected to her Judaism, I've been living for many years with a sense that I don't know who my family is anymore, because I feel so torn, and I feel there are parts of my family that are taking my Judaism and abducting it and using it in ways that create huge dissonance for me with my Jewish values. And I think a lot of us are feeling that right now, especially with what's going on, with what Israel is doing for the past many years in the West Bank and in Gaza, of which what's happened since October 7th is just the worst nightmare that's happening in this trajectory. Could you speak a little bit about this dissonance between our Jewish values and our commitment to life and our commitment to the stranger, and what we're seeing is being done in our name, which makes it so hard for our kids to be able to defend their Judaism?
So, I often, I feel you on this, right? It's very painful when you see members of your family doing things that you just really find abhorrent, right? Like I'm definitely struggling with that myself. I think, I always hesitate when I hear the term Jewish values because, Jewish values are very complicated, right? Like the stranger is certainly one thing, as is self-defense, right? Like there is, anytime you're going to talk about Jewish values, what you're going to get is actually a bunch of contradictory ideas that seem contradictory that you're going to have to figure out how to balance, right? You're going to have basically Jewish values, I think if we're being honest about it, are a balancing act of, justice versus mercy, strength versus compassion. I mean, you're always going to be balancing them. So, I think like in any family, family's hard. Like friendship is easier. If your friend is really abhorrent, you don't have to be friends with them anymore, right? That commitment is actually pretty, it can be revoked, I think, not easily, but more easily than family. I think with family, at some point there is a limit, right? If your family is doing something so abhorrent, at some point you do have to say, we're gonna end this relationship is dangerous, right? It's not safe. And I think the question for us is like, can we figure out ways to tolerate up to that boundary of unsafety? Can we figure out ways to still love people because they are our family and maybe try to change them? I think the shaming and shunning, which is definitely my instinct a lot of the time, right? Just because I'm so frustrated with certain Jews right now, it turns out it doesn't actually change them. It doesn't actually help them modify their views a little bit or see a different perspective. So, to the extent up to that boundary of safety, I do think it is worth trying to talk to people. I really do. The hardcore ideologues, like I just said, you're probably not going to convince them, but if they're your family, there is that bond of love, right? At the end of the day, there is that bond of love. And I've actually, having spent time and studied with Jews whose views I often find quite appalling, I still learned a lot from them. And I like to think they learned something from me, right? I like to think that they walked away from that relationship a little bit changed. So I realize this isn't a great answer because there isn't a great answer here. But I will just really validate how painful this is, right? This is just like, it's a very, very painful time in our community. And I will also say that these splits are not necessarily our fault. Like our entrance into modernity was kind of a shattering project for the Jewish people. I think it's, we've always been divided in some ways. We've always, you had the Litvaks versus the Chassid. I mean, we've been doing this a long time. But I think modernity has made this particularly hard for us as we try to find our place and not be killed by people. And I think it's tough.
We're out of time for the questions. I do want to invite people to come back at 1 o'clock. The focus will be on this issue of contemporary Jewish identity. I think Sarah's new book does not yet have a title. We've been talking about that a little bit.
This book is far from seeing the light of day.
The whole issue about Jewish identity will be at 1 o'clock back in the sanctuary. I just want to make mention of the fact that this, your appearance here is underwritten, made possible by Bob Bluebrand and Carol Bloomberg, who we want to appreciate. I think they're watching. They're actually on vacation. They are feel really upset that they couldn't be here, but things just didn't work out for them.
Thank you so much.
So we want to thank Bob and Carol. Hopefully they're having a good time. And Sarah, it's been such an honor to have you on our Bima and to share your wisdom.
Honor to be with you, said I.
Hopefully you
married you for many years.
You don't need to be on the program to come back.